When most people think of renting a home, they think of this. Goodbye, money. Bye. Nice knowing you. Bye. Goodbye. And when they think of owning a home, they think of this.
Good morrow, sir. It is I, an owner of the land. Are you enjoying this fine day down there with all of the peasants?
But this is completely incorrect. I grew my net worth from zero to just under $100,000 in only 3 years by renting an apartment. Today, I'd like to blow your mind by showing you how everything you thought about housing is wrong. There is a massive misconception in today's world that renting is just throwing your money away and that owning a home is a great investment. But this is actually not necessarily true, and in today's video, I will prove this to you beyond a mathematical doubt. But first, I'd like to address why this is a misconception, one that you may even harbor inside your own mind. Why? There are 4 players who promote home ownership heavily. The first is the real estate industry. Their motivation for promoting home ownership is obvious. Mortgage brokers, real estate agents, and home builders all make money directly through the housing market. It is in their interest for homes to be bought and sold as much as possible. The media is another source of influence. I'm sure we're all familiar with at least one reality TV show based around house hunting or home improvement. But can you think of any that involve renters? The media subconsciously shapes much of our own decision making and our views than we are generally aware of. The third player is the government. The government absolutely wants you to own a home. There are countless programs in place that incentivize home ownership. They even help insure mortgages, which makes it less risky for the banks to loan money, thus incentivizing banks to create as many mortgages as they want. The final player is your family. Most likely your parents have told you that you should buy a home as it is a great asset and investment. They may even tell you that it's the best investment they ever made. And I trust that their motivation for telling you this is in the right place. They deeply care and want the best for you. But unfortunately, the numbers don't necessarily add up that way. So now that we see how our ideas around home ownership might have been shaped by our culture, let's actually dive into the question. Should you personally rent or buy a home? There's actually 2 sides of this question we're going to need to address. The first is the financial side, and that's where we'll use some really handy calculations to show whether it makes sense for you to either rent or buy a home, financially speaking. And secondly, we'll also need to address the psychological side of the equation. This side is extremely important because, at the end of the day, the whole reason that we're trying to grow our wealth in the first place is so that we can pursue happiness in our lives in one form or another. So we'll need to talk about what might make a homeowner happy versus what might make a renter happy. But first, let's talk money. Alright, so let's dispel the misconception that renting a place to live is just throwing money away. And not only that, I'd actually like to show you that it's possible as a renter to become richer than you otherwise would be as a homeowner. Yes, you heard that right. You can actually end up with more money as a renter. To do this, I'd like to introduce you to something called the 5% rule. I learned this rule from Ben Felix and it is just fantastic. It's such a simple and unique way to think about the rent versus buy debate. So let's walk through how the rule works. The basic idea is that we're going to compare the unrecoverable cost of renting to the unrecoverable cost of buying. Wait a second though, hold up. What's an unrecoverable cost? An unrecoverable cost is an expense that you pay which has no residual value. In simple terms, this just means money that you pay and then you'll never see again and you won't have any value left over. So as a renter, it's really easy to determine your unrecoverable cost. This is just your monthly rent payment. Rent is an unrecoverable cost because you pay for rent and then that money is gone. There's no monetary value left over from that transaction. This is why most people assume that renting is just throwing money away. But homeowners have unrecoverable costs too. They're just a little less obvious. That's because a mortgage payment is not an entirely unrecoverable cost. Part of your mortgage payment goes towards the principal of your mortgage, which builds you home equity. So then what are a homeowner's unrecoverable costs? Well, it turns out there's 3 of them, and all of those together make up the components of the 5% rule. The first is property tax, second is maintenance costs, and the third is the cost of capital. So let's go ahead and break these down. Property tax is an expense you'll pay annually as a homeowner with no value left over. Thus, it is an unrecoverable cost. Generally, property taxes work out to be about 1% of the home value, so this will represent the first percent of our 5% rule. Second, we have maintenance costs. This is a really broad category that covers a wide range of unrecoverable costs. Think things like replacing the roof or any other maintenance activities that will inevitably have to be performed at some point. Since data on average maintenance costs is not readily available, Ben Felix has stated it's reasonable to estimate 1% of the property value for this portion of the rule. Now the third piece, cost of capital, will make up the remaining 3%. Now this part can get a little bit confusing, so I'll try and simplify it as much as possible. So there's 2 ways to think about the cost of capital. The first is the cost of debt. And that's because when you take out a mortgage, part of that mortgage payment is actually going to go towards an unrecoverable cost. And that's the interest that you're going to pay on your mortgage, because you're just paying that money towards interest and then you're not seeing any kind of return from that or getting any kind of residual value back. So the cost of debt is the cost of the interest rate. And right now, with interest rates as low as they are, you can probably pretty easily get a mortgage for a little under 3%. But to keep things simple, let's just round it up to 3%. And then we have all components of our 5% rule. We have 1% for property tax, 1% for maintenance costs, and 3% for the cost of debt. But we can also look at this final component, this cost of capital, another way as well. We can consider something called the cost of equity. Now, when we're thinking about the cost of equity, we have to think about it like an opportunity cost. And an opportunity cost is when you have 2 choices and you have to make a decision between either one. You can't have both. So the opportunity cost is what you forego when you choose one option over the other. For example, let's say it's Friday night and I'm looking to treat myself to a nice dinner. I can either order something nice on Uber Eats, or I can take a stab at a recipe from Binging with Babish. If I choose Uber Eats, I gain convenience and time, but I lose money and cooking experience. If I choose making gnocchi, I definitely lose time, lots of time, but I gain the rewarding triumph of making it on my own and probably also save a few bucks. So each decision has a cost associated with it by choosing the other choice. Now, when we're talking about the cost of equity as a homeowner, what we're really doing here is we're talking about the choice between either using your down payment money to purchase a home, or the other option you could use that down payment money for is investing it in the stock market. And both of these 2 choices are going to result in a difference. But how large is this difference exactly? To figure this out, we'll need to look at the expected return of owning a home versus the expected return of investing your money in the stock market. The expected return for owning a home, according to global historical data, is about 3% per year. Typically, homes rise in value about 1% above inflation on average globally. Now, I can practically just hear people from Toronto or anywhere else with a hot real estate market screaming at me at this point saying that home values don't increase by 3% every year. Listen, there's always going to be areas that are hot and there's always going to be areas that are cold, and those will fluctuate over time. But just because you're an anomaly in the data doesn't mean that's what you should be basing your future financial plans off of. Just like you wouldn't assume that all stocks return 100% just because you were lucky enough to invest in a hot tech stock. That's not a smart way to plan for the future. stocks actually returned about 6.9% per year based on the global historical data. But in Ben's analysis, his team at PWL Capital have estimated future stock returns to be more in the ballpark of 6.57% due to high price to earning ratios in the market right now. So now, finally, we can take our expected stock return, which we have at 6.57% per year, and then we can subtract the expected home ownership return of 3% to arrive at an opportunity cost of 3.57%. In other words, by buying a home with your down payment instead of investing that money in the stock market, you'd be giving up an extra 3.57% return every single year. But to simplify things and to be on the safe side as well, we can round this down to about 3% to arrive again at Ben's 5% rule. Okay, so now that we know what the actual 5% is composed of, let's put this rule into action. Now, fortunately, it's actually really simple to use. There's just 3 easy steps. First, take a look at a home that you're interested in purchasing and then multiply that value of the home by 5%. This will tell you the total unrecoverable cost of that home per year. Now remember, this is an unrecoverable cost that would be associated with owning this home, so it's not money that's going to be going towards building equity, it's just money that's a cost and it's going to be gone. For example, let's use $500,000 as the value of the home and we'll multiply that by 5% to get our unrecoverable cost of $25,000 per year. Second, let's divide this number by 12 to get the monthly unrecoverable costs. So if we divide that $25,000 by 12, we get $2,083 per month in unrecoverable costs. Third, now we compare this monthly unrecoverable cost with the price it would be to rent a similar home or apartment. So now we can compare it and see if this unrecoverable cost is higher than what you could pay to rent a similar apartment, then it probably makes sense financially anyway for you to be a renter. And this rule is also really cool because you can use it in reverse. You can use it if you're already in the position of being a renter to kind of flip it on its head and see what type of home you could purchase for the equivalent unrecoverable cost of your rent right now. So first we'll take our monthly rent and we'll multiply it by 12 to get our annual unrecoverable costs of renting. So let's do this with my rent. So currently I pay $1,666 per month in rent. And if we multiply this number by 12, we get $19,992 in annual unrecoverable costs. Now, secondly, we'll divide this number by 5% to get the equivalent home value. So $19,992 divided by 5% gives me about $400,000. So in other words, if I could find a home right now that was about $400,000 or less, then it might make more sense for me to be a homeowner as opposed to a renter right now. But do you want to hear a really funny joke? I live in Toronto. That's the joke. There are no homes for $400,000. Maybe a 300 square foot condo. Maybe. But yeah, no thanks. I'm more than happy with my apartment. So all in all, the 5% rule is a really handy way to at least get a ballpark idea of whether it makes sense for you to be a buyer or a renter. But does the rule have problems? Is it a little bit of an oversimplification? Absolutely, absolutely. It's not meant to be a perfect solution. It's just meant to kind of get you in the ballpark to see whether you're way off. Maybe you're renting when it turns out that you definitely could be a homeowner. Or maybe you're looking at buying a home, but once you run this 5% rule, you see that the unrecoverable costs of owning that home are way higher than it would be to rent a similar apartment. So more than anything, it's a signal to take a second look at your financial situation and decision making. And it's also a huge vote of confidence to let you know that if you are renting, that no, you are not throwing your money away. But a huge piece around the debate of renting versus buying is the assumption that if you are somebody who is a renter, then you have to place a very large emphasis on investing your money that you save from not buying a home into the stock market. If the renter doesn't invest their money, then this data is going to skew heavily in favor of the homeowner. And that's because a lot of people struggle with saving money and then investing that money. So home ownership can actually be really appealing in this regard because it basically acts as a forced savings vehicle for people. So let's talk about what I mean by that in the next section on psychology. When somebody owns a home, they have to make a mortgage payment to live in that home. Part of this mortgage payment goes towards the principal on the loan, which means you're building equity or home ownership in your home. In this way, owning a home forces you to effectively save money. This can be very beneficial for people who normally struggle psychologically with saving or investing. Another psychological benefit of owning a home is that people who do own homes often say that having something that is totally yours is priceless. No landlord to deal with, nothing. It's totally yours, you have full control. I understand that, and I can agree that those are great psychological benefits for owning a home. But for me personally, I also gain a lot of psychological benefits by renting. First of all, I love the flexibility that renting offers. I love the city I currently live in, but I plan to travel frequently and hopefully live in several places throughout my life for maybe a few years at a time. Being a homeowner would make this very difficult. I also like having one single payment that basically covers my housing expenses. There's no mortgage payment with some going towards the principal, some going towards interest. There's no property tax to deal with, no maintenance costs. This makes budgeting and planning very easy. Speaking of maintenance, I also love the fact that I'm not responsible for it. Besides general everyday upkeep of my living space, I'm not on the hook for when my washing machine stops working or a window needs to be replaced. Ultimately, for my girlfriend and I, we would like to build our wealth until we're in the position to be able to build our own home. I'm fortunate that my partner is a designer and an architect in the making, so we would like to build something really unique to live in, and we're willing to wait until we can have that within our means. I don't want to settle on a home because I'm scared that by renting I'm throwing money away or that I'll miss a huge rise in property values. I'm more than happy to rent until I can have the home that I want, and the fact that financially speaking it makes more sense for me to be a renter right now is just a cherry on top. So I hope today's video really helped clear some things up for you regarding owning a home versus renting a home. And I'd really like you to test out the 5% rule and let me know how it might have changed your decision making. Leave me some comments because I'm really curious about how it works in your current living situation and in the city or town that you currently live. And with all that being said, I'm Steve Antonioni and this has been Cash College on renting versus buying a home. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed today's video, subscribe if you're not already, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon.